Sorry about that epic failure. I accidentally turned off my iPad and had to stop recording, and I could not add to the one recording, so I had to create a second recording. My apologies. When we last left off, we had just read 1 Corinthians 13, and the question was, what is the main idea? And so as we set up our discourse analysis, we're going to create what it's called a discourse map. And the first thing I want to do is write the passage at the top. So we'll write 1 Corinthians. And we can abbreviate 1 Cor 13. And then we want to write the main idea. And when I look at this passage, I think the main idea is at the end, because this whole passage talks about love. And in fact, it says a lot of wonderful things about love, and I think it's most clear that the message is the greatest is love. Or we could reword it as love is the greatest. So it's important that we identify the main idea and also know what verse, because when we make a discourse map, we want to be able to go back to it if needed. So we want to write the main idea is love. Actually, I'm going to give myself a little bit more room. We'll go love is greatest. And then we write verse 13. Now that we've done that, now we want to do the second step, which is to identify how all the parts of this discourse fit into this idea that love is the greatest. And the best way I think to think about this is by thinking about hooks. This main idea has two hooks. The first hook is love. And we have to ask ourselves, does part of the passage explain what love is? And I'll give a spoiler, it does. The second thing in the main idea, the second hook, is the idea that love is the greatest. And we have to ask ourselves, are the parts trying to show that love is the greatest? And there are those two. And so we have to do then is hook on those ideas that explain what love is, and then hook on the ideas that explain why love is the greatest. So let's go back now to the passage, and we see here in the beginning this part, if I speak of tongues of men and angels but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or clanging cymbal. And if I speak in the gift of prophecy, if I have faith, but all these times, if they don't have love, the person is nothing. Now, it's Paul who wrote this letter, but for discourse analysis, actually, we don't even need to know who wrote the letter. We can simply say the author, or we could say Paul, if we do know who the author is, or Peter, or whomever. And in this paragraph, it doesn't really say what love is. It talks about why love is the greatest. Because even if you have the ability to speak in tongues, the gift of prophecy, the gift of faith, and the freedom to give everything you have and even die a martyr, but if you don't have love, you are nothing. So let's now look at verses 1 through 3 and put them in our discourse map. Love is the greatest. We can make a little hook. And then here, write out why love is the greatest. And we can abbreviate and we can simplify. We don't have to rewrite every word in the passage. So what I would do is write something like, without love, prophecy, faith, I believe there's another, prophecy, speaking in tongues, and giving self-sacrifice. Without love, prophecy, faith, speaking in tongues, that refers to speaking in angelic languages, speaking in tongues, and self-sacrifice are worthless. And then we just put the verses. Verses 1 through 3. Let's go back to the passage now, see what the next paragraph hooks onto. We have to ask ourselves, does it hook onto love and what that love is? Does it hook onto the idea about the other things being worthless? Or does it go back to why love is the greatest, but in a different way? Let's look at verses 4 through 7. Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not eagerly angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. It always protects, it always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Well, hopefully you notice that there's a lot of sentences that start with love is or love does not. In fact, the next paragraph also has a similar sentence at the beginning where it says love never fails. And so this section explains what love is and what love does. If we were doing discourse analysis for a project like you will next week, we would want to write all these out. But for now, let's just simplify it and make a brief chart. So we'll go back to our discourse map, and under this love section, we will create some notes about what love is not, does, and does not. So we can say love is not, love does. In fact, what we could do, instead of making all these different hooks, let's simplify it. We'll say love is / does, and then love isn't and doesn't. In other words, we'll put the good things on this left side and the bad things that love isn't and doesn't do on this right side. Sometimes as you do a discourse map, you may have an idea midway through and want to change your setup. So we can start by saying that love is patient and kind, does not envy, does not boast, I'm sorry, I was adjusting something on my computer. Love is patient and love is kind. Those are both positive things. So we could go to this chart and we could write patient, kind. And then the next sentence says, it does not envy, does not boast. Those are the bad things it doesn't do. We'll put that on the right side. Then the next sentence, next phrase says, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others, not self-seeking. It's not easily angered, keeps no record of wrongs. And I'm going to reword that as remember wrongs. Again, it's okay on a discourse map to simplify the wording, to change it. You want to short it down. You want to show the passage, not rewrite it. The next list is, the next items on the list is that it does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. And so the delight in evils is what it doesn't do. It does rejoice in the truth, so we'll put that on the left side. There we can add the word the. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. I'm going to leave out the always and just list the other things. I guess I did write them all down. Sorry, I said I would take a shortcut, but I didn't. Just want to give you my best. Always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. And then finally we could say love never fails. Taken all together then, we now have a list of what love is and does and isn't and doesn't. And the one thing we're missing is that this list comes from verses 4 through 8a. So I'm going to just circle it and make a note that says it's verses 4 through 8a. There we go. So if we look at our map as a whole now, we know what love is or isn't, and does and doesn't, and we also know one reason why love is the greatest. As we go back to the passage now, we have to ask ourselves, is the next section, the next paragraph, more about what love is or isn't, does or doesn't, or is it more about why love is the greatest? Let's continue on in verse 8b. Where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part, but when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child, thought like a child, reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put childish ways behind me. Now we see only as a reflection, then we will see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. If you notice in this paragraph, there are no statements about love is this, or love isn't that, love does this, or love does not do that, or such and such. So, this paragraph will also be on why love is the greatest. And we can summarize it by saying that a bunch of other good things like prophecies and knowledge and tongues will eventually stop. In fact, only, as it says in verse 13, only faith, hope, and love will remain. But even out of those, the greatest is love. So if we look at paragraph 8b through 12, and also paragraph 13, we see two more reasons why love is the greatest. Now we have to ask ourselves, looking at our map, does the paragraph we just read connect more to love is the greatest as its own idea, meaning we need another hook from the top? Or does it hook onto this idea about love, about how other things are worthless without love? That is the question we have to ask ourselves. And considering the other passage, the paragraph mentions prophecies and tongues and knowledge. Again, I would argue that it connects more with the idea in the first paragraph, that without love, prophecy, faith, speaking in tongues, and self-sacrifice are worthless. And so why are they worthless? Because they are only temporary gifts, not eternal gifts. So I'm going to write something like these. These are temporary gifts, not eternal ones. And again, we want to cite the verses. So I put verses 8b through 12. And then finally, we also had verse 13a. Remember, 13b says love is the greatest. I'll add that into my main idea. But now we want to talk about 13a, that faith, hope, and love remain, but love is the greatest. That sentence, again, will obviously go with the greatest part. And since it's not talking about prophecy or speaking in tongues or self-sacrifice, we're going to connect it back to the main hook and say love is greater than faith and hope. And the author says that in verse 13. And that, my friends, is a discourse map. We see the main idea. And we also see then the other parts of the passage and how they connect to the passage. We see one reason why love is the greatest, and that reason is explained later on. We also see a second reason why love is the greatest. And in the middle of the passage, we see what love is and isn't, what love does and doesn't. So this is one great way to read the Bible. You can only really use it, again, on discourses, which are medium or long speeches. But when you encounter a medium or long speech, whether a prophecy, a statement by an important king or teacher, Jesus gives many long speeches and sermons, and the letters in the New Testament, you can use this method to understand them better. I'm going to stop the video now and create a third video with another example that can further help you understand how to use discourse analysis in a Bible passage. This first example we've done is rather straightforward. The next example will be a little more difficult, which will help you as you later choose a passage to read that may not be as straightforward as 1 Corinthians 13. Thank you.